Ireland's pedophilia scandals are in no means closed knowledge. The horrors committed by the Catholic Church are still being exposed to this day. Priests, brothers and nuns, who were supposedly representatives of God, inflicted a pain so unimaginable that the scars of the abuse sit deeply within the souls of the countless victims. From the unmerciful murder of innocent infants, which seen the bodies dumped into a sewage tank at the hands of the nuns in the Tomb Mother and Baby Home in Galway, to the infamous Father Brendan Smith, who assaulted over 143 young children during his time in the church. He passed away 1 month into his prison sentence in 1997. These are just two of the many cases and scandals that have been unearthed over the years and still gather mainstream attention.
When I told him that I got raped of a Saturday, got a merciful beating after it, and then he came along the following morning and put Holy Communion in my mouth. That woman will tell you how many times I jump out of the bed at night with the sweat pumping out of me because I see these fellas at the end of the bed with their fingers doing that to me and pulling me into the room to rape me.
The story I'm going to tell you about today is one of the most disturbing pieces of information I've ever come across, and my research on this topic was, at certain points, very uncomfortable. This is the Trudder home for troubled traveller boys, or at least it was. Located in Newtownmountkennedy, County Wicklow, the refurbished home, formerly a Catholic school for girls and ran by violent, abusive nuns who committed their own atrocities, a story for another time, was set up in 1975 by the Dublin Committee for Travelling People for young traveller boys who had troubled upbringings or difficulties with the law. The boys were mostly aged between 7 to 12 years old. The house was far from any point of local contact, basically in the middle of nowhere. What was intended to be a place of rehabilitation and instilled discipline would very quickly become a house of horrors and leave a devastating impact on its victims. The abuse in Trudder House started at the top. Duncan McKin was appointed as director of the establishment and would oversee the ongoings for the boys. He had a background as a care worker and was deemed more than qualified for the role. At the time, the DCTP had no idea that not only had they just appointed one of the most notorious closet pedophiles in the history of the Irish state, they would actually appoint two in the later hiring of Porter Brendan Kelly. They also placed a priest there too, a rather controversial priest, but I'll talk about him shortly. Combined, these monsters would inflict a never-ending nightmare on the boys who came to stay at Trudder and would do so for many years, with Kelly actually joining Trudder after McKin's departure. They would rape, sadistically beat, and torture over 19 boys during their tenancy, 19 being the amount of accusers who came forward. The actual number is believed to have been at least 57 over a 12-year period, 6 years for Kelly and a 6-year period for McKin, respectively, because, as previously mentioned, neither were part of each other's regime. Boys would lodge together in rooms, as was the case with most boarding homes of the time, having their breakfast, lunch and dinner, and would even be allowed to participate in activities in the surrounding yard while they tried to better themselves for when they re-entered the world after their stay came to an end. McKin was reluctant to accept boys over the age of 12, as he believed it was difficult to reshape their personalities to become more effective at an older age. In reality, he wanted younger, weaker and more innocent boys who had very little fight in them when coming up against a fully grown man, easier victims. However, boys over McKin's preferred age were still admitted and were also still abused. The boys were raped on a daily basis and even thrown into caged cells in the basement of the home for extended periods of time should they ever contest or complain what was happening to them. Duncan McKin was described as a beast by accusers who later came forward, an aggressive, cold and forceful man who switched between what favoured him at that particular time, be it rape or a beating. McKin orchestrated the root of the abuse. He was known to beat the smaller boys black and blue with a plastic green hose pipe before taking them to the basement in order to continue the abuse on a more cynical and disturbing level. He was in charge of everything. He could make any boy's life very comfortable or a living nightmare. He chose to make it a nightmare for everyone. The level of abuse was so impactful and so regularly occurring that some of the older boys McKin abused then start abusing smaller boys themselves. It's possible that this is what the boys believed was normal due to the mental implications of the trauma they experienced, but also at the same time, the argument of being fully aware of their own harmful actions is very justifiable. Accompanying Duncan McKin as a guardian director was Father Dez Williams, who was appointed to oversee the safety and well-being of the boys. Despite an overwhelming amount of reports being made to An Garda Síochána, the Irish police force, about Williams abusing boys at St. Kevin's Football Club, a club he founded and owned, disguising his pedophilia with him claiming a devout love of football, the reason for the club's founding. Even with the amount of reports increasing, with one report in particular followed by a first-hand account by the victim 40 years later, is so extremely horrific that I just cannot bring myself to even describe the nature of the act. It involved Williams and 4 other priests, and my stomach churns even saying that, and that is as far as I'll go in discussing this act. Nothing whatsoever was done about the allegations, and the church decided that Williams was to be completely removed from the situation, resulting in him being placed at Trudder House in the Wicklow countryside in the middle of nowhere with dozens of underage boys. It's almost as if he was rewarded for his abuse by being placed into what can only be described as a primal hunting ground for a pedophile of Williams' standards. Truly disturbing. For 6 years, McKin's had free reign across the Trudder House alongside Father Dez Williams. However, in 1981, McKin's suddenly resigned his position as director of Trudder House and vanished from the country completely after he was tipped off that a case was being built on his criminal inhumane behaviour towards the boys. He travelled to Scotland, where he began working in care homes for boys again, and after allegations were made against him for the abuse of those children, he departed Scotland to begin a new life in Canada. Just like his time in Scotland and Ireland, Duncan McKin found himself once again working in care homes for boys. You won't be surprised to know that more claims were made in Canada against McKin. However, the monster was never reprimanded or even brought to trial. He died in Canada in 1990 in his early 50s. Father Dez Williams, who carried his own vicious abuse of young boys from St. Kevin's Football Club to Trudder Lodge, continued abusing the troubled traveller boys without consequence. Under the protection of the church, he had free reign just like McKin. As a further insult to the victims that were so badly damaged and harmed by Williams, the monster was then ordained to the position of Auxiliary Bishop of Dublin. He was actually consecrated in Rome by Pope John Paul II that year also. Furthermore, when Dez Williams died in 2006, Archbishop Dermot Martin gave the homily during the funeral mass. Martin described Williams as a loyal and discreet cooperator of many archbishops. May Duncan McKin's and Dez Williams both rot in hell. Although the horror did not stop following the departure of these two monsters from Trudder House, it continued with Brendan Kelly, of whom I mentioned earlier. However, there was some justice following Brendan's actions, but let's start with the beginning of his tenure at the home. Kelly, now a father of one and married, was in his early 20s when he began work as a porter at Trudder House. Through his work and longevity at the house, he rose to a position of power and created his own establishment of abuse. Kelly was even commended several times for his efforts in trying to help the boys who were understandably angry at society. His most disturbing and sinister act was taking the boys away for a weekend period in his personal caravan, where he would be completely alone and secluded with them. There was even one report that stated, as of recently, the spare wheel from that caravan could still be seen in the overgrown landscape that surrounds the property itself. Brendan was a very mild-mannered and calm individual. He relied on coercing the boys through long periods of grooming before his abuse of them would take place. He carried himself with the boys in this manner for years. A complaint about Kelly was eventually submitted, which led to an investigation on him. This resulted in his immediate resignation, and he never worked in childcare again. A Garda investigation led to Brendan Kelly being charged, and over 200 witness statements were given against him. Although he maintained innocence all through his trial, he was jailed for 7 years in 1998 for the sexual assault of just 2 of the boys, despite 3 coming forward. They claimed there was many more who did not want to place themselves in the public eye. Trudder House was later renamed River Lodge. It wasn't explained why, but my opinion is that it was an attempt to cement over a name that is synonymous with so much pain and darkness. It lay in a rather derelict condition, deteriorating as the years passed by, the real-life house of horrors. As of today, the property is being renovated to house foreign immigrants from war-torn countries seeking emergency asylum. Trudder House will operate once more, though it would always be overshadowed by the dark atrocities that occurred there 40 years ago.